chill it out. Who here has heard of PhoneGap? It's like a third or more of the audience, which is awesome. We shipped PhoneGap like 2 years ago, and no one had really heard of it until after the first JSConf. And yeah, now people are getting familiar with it, which is wicked. So this is an 8-bit Ninjas presentation, and where are my speaker notes? Oh, according to this, I haven't started my presentation yet. Sweet. This is what I get for using Google Docs, I guess. Anything? Show speaker notes. Oh, I know where it is. Hold on, you guys. I'm really sorry about this. It's like in the bottom left of this thing. There we go. Okay. So you probably can't read that, but my name is Brian LeRoux, and you can find me on Twitter. I work for Nitobi Software, which is a small software consultancy in Vancouver, Canada. And we are the creators of PhoneGap, which is a pretty awesome project for creating mobile applications with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This talk, I'm just going to go through the current state of the PhoneGap project so you guys can get a better understanding of what's been going on and where we're going. A lot's changed in the last couple of years, and it's a much more mature project than when we started. In fact, when we started, it was, I don't want to say it was a total hack, but it pretty much was a total hack, and now it's growing into something that is being used by thousands of people, and it's actually seen some good adoption and a lot of big companies behind it. So when we first shipped PhoneGap 2 years ago, it was essentially an extension on the native web view for iOS, which was only iPhones at that time. Now we've got support for 8 platforms, 8 different mobile platforms for creating native mobile web apps. And we're getting tons of support from different companies like Sony Ericsson has adopted PhoneGap as their standard SDK for writing apps for Symbian and Android. And Symbian Foundation recently accepted PhoneGap as a part of their web extensions package, which will be shipping in Symbian 3. So that's pretty big news. You can write web apps that ship on mobile devices that target not only Symbian, Android, iPhone, and these big companies are supporting it. So that's pretty cool. A lot of people ask us, like, how many people are using PhoneGap, and we have no idea. It's an open source project, so there's no way for us to actually know that because we give it away, but since last January, it's been downloaded over 500,000 times. That's not including any numbers on GitHub. We have no clue. At Nitobi, we use PhoneGap to write applications for ourselves, and we've shipped over 50 apps in the last year with a team of 15 people. That's pretty impressive. PhoneGap gives you a huge advantage because you can leverage your already existing skills for the web to create apps faster than anyone else. And really that's what it's all about, because most apps that we have to write were due a few weeks ago, according to our clients. So one thing about all this stuff is PhoneGap is really more of an interim solution than something that we're saying that you should be using from now on moving forward. PhoneGap is a platform for writing web apps, but really we should just be writing web apps. But there's times when we can't write web apps, and that's when we want to access native device features such as the file system, or if we want to access the contacts or the camera or any of this other cool stuff. And so PhoneGap really is just an interim solution. The browsers are going to be doing this stuff eventually anyways, and geolocation is a perfect example of this, and it's permeating back to all the other browsers. So, fragmentation. These are most of the major mobile platforms. We don't have Samsung Bata in there. I'm not mentioning Windows Mobile because no one cares. Oh, I am mentioning Windows Mobile. Maybe the Europeans care. Whatever. And there's some interesting developments here. If we look at this, there's all kinds of different platforms, but a whole bunch of these platforms actually are already starting to support the web, and they hadn't previously. And so there is a lot of fragmentation there, but the fragmentation isn't necessarily existing so much in how you write the apps, but rather the SDKs that you have to install to begin writing these apps. There's another aspect to this whole thing, and that's distribution of your applications. And about a year ago, I started to get really scared because there was something like 50 app stores. And now, as of today, there's over 90 app stores. And I used to think this was a really bad thing, but I'm beginning to believe that this is actually a really good thing. There's initiatives out there. Is anyone here familiar with Bondi? If you are, raise your hand. Okay, have you heard of the WAC? It's a really terrible name. It stands for something like Web Application Warehouse or something. They're looking to standardize the idea of an app store so that app stores could be federated. And this seems like the right thing to do, and I think it's sort of a good idea on paper, but it's never going to fly. All these people are never going to work together. And this proliferation of app stores seems like a really bad thing, like, oh no, there's going to be dozens of app stores. But if we think about how like physical goods get transferred, this isn't actually a big departure. I don't want to go to a big box store or a mall that sells everything and it's kind of crummy. I'd rather go to a bespoke store that curates content or goods that I expect. And you could imagine things like you could go to the EA App Store and buy EA games. And this is likely what the future is going to hold. But, you know, this turns into a big distribution nightmare. But this kind of fragmentation's already been solved for years. And, you know, it's that whole internet thing that we've been talking about. And it turns out it's pretty good at dealing with fragmentation and distribution. And so, once again, PhoneGap is a way for you to get your apps into these various app stores. But you shouldn't invest too heavily in the idea of developing for app stores when we have the internet to do this anyways. So you could almost consider PhoneGap as a temporary progressive enhancement technique. It's a way to get your mobile web apps built and in app stores while we wait for the browsers to catch up with device APIs. So that's another important part about all this. We've got native device sensors and native device access, and so what the fuck does that mean? Sensors are things like your camera, your accelerometer, things that access data. And then there's device data, and that's things like photographs, contacts, whatever. So these are the problems that we're looking to solve with PhoneGap. And we're also looking to provide a reference implementation for installable web apps. And what the hell is an installable web app? I think like you can look at an installable web app, much like you can look at device sensors and data. It's all it really is an icon for the loading screen, a loading screen itself, and a permissions manifest of some kind. All of these various mobile app stores and mobile platforms have this pattern encapsulated somehow. And interestingly, there's work being done at the W3C called the Device API Working Group, which is tackling the idea of sensors and data. And there's the Widget Working Group, which is tackling the idea of installable web apps. And then there's things like the Chrome Web App Store that are coming. So these concepts are already out there and being worked on. PhoneGap is just another one. Yeah, I have no idea what that slide has to do with anything. Okay, so current platform support is the next big question people have. Like, what are you guys working on? And what are you doing? And so before I talk specifically to what platforms that we're supporting, I have to talk about how we plan to support it. And you don't want to start building this big monolithic system when you're dealing with devices that have the computational power of something from the 90s. Like, these things are pretty crummy computers. And so PhoneGap itself has to have the smallest footprint possible. We can't touch, we have to touch as little as possible so that we remain performant. Another rule that we have to play by is that we have to use the native SDK. It would be nice if we could write our own browser, but that would also be yet another browser, and that would probably cause more problems than solve them. Most cardinal rule of PhoneGap is that we do not fuck with the DOM. And there's a lot of reasons for that, the main one being that the DOM is a mess already. No sense in us making it worse. There's plenty of library authors that are here right now that can fuck with the DOM and solve that problem themselves. PhoneGap should remain accessible, and the idea here is that you can install your own stuff and keep working. So sometimes people get confused and they think, oh, PhoneGap is for building web apps, therefore it has no native access. But this is an incorrect assertion. PhoneGap is a starting point for writing web apps that allows you to write native extensions yourself. So there's no reason that you can't have native code. We just think it's a bad idea. If you can avoid it, you should, because it's not cross-platform, and then you'll have to implement it 6 times if you want to hit multiple devices. That said, there is times when you should write native code. There are certain platform-specific interactions that people look for when they're using their mobile device. And my favorite example of this is the back button. Who's got an iPhone? Who's got an Android? My brothers. Who's got BlackBerry? Crickets. Right. Okay, well, iPhone and Android provide a really good example of this. So in iPhone land, there's one button, and that sort of takes you home. But in the BlackBerry world, we've got 4 physical buttons that are almost on every device, and one of those includes a back button. And nothing pisses off an Android user more than a virtual back button in the top left, which is what you see in Android or in iPhone land. In WebOS, things are even more interesting. There's no buttons at all, and there's no virtual buttons at all. Use gestures to go back and forth, which is cool. But now you've got a user experience expectation. And this isn't necessarily native UI, but it is a native feature, and when you're writing an app, you probably want to write the best app possible. And if you're writing the best app possible, then you're going to want to live up to the expectations of the users. And so here's a case where it makes a lot of sense to drop in a native code. Anyways, there's other examples that are a lot like that. And the final thing, we say we should not pollute the global namespace, and we're working on that. So, yeah, this is most definitely the biggest problem with mobile software development right now. If you want to write an app for any given device, you'll have to install an SDK for that device. So if you want to go cross-platform with multiple devices, you're going to have to install 6 or 8 different SDKs. In some cases, those SDKs only can be installed on one operating system. And so then you're virtualizing Windows when you have to do Windows development, or you're buying a Mac Mini because you can't really virtualize OS X. And it's a pain in the ass. And we're not really doing much to solve it, but I just thought I'd bring that up. Okay, that's right. I was going to tell you guys what platforms we support. So this is what PhoneGap currently supports today. iOS, which does include iPad, iPod Touches, and iPhones. For some reason, people ask us that a lot. All Android devices going back to 1.5, 1.6. WebOS, Symbian, Windows Mobile. We're going to be supporting Windows Phone 7. I was talking to Dion about this earlier, and he's like, what do you think of Windows Phone 7? And Phil, who's got the giant hair, and he's right over there, actually has one. So if you want to laugh, you could check that out. Windows Phone 7 is interesting because they put the device out there and they're like, go build some apps and try it out. But we can't actually install anything to the device. We can play around with the web browser and stuff, so that's kind of cool. So we've got, there's a guy out there who ported PhoneGap completely to Windows Phone 7, but we have no way to test on a physical device because none really currently exists. So once we get one, we're going to bring it in, and then we'll say, yes, we support Windows Phone 7. MeeGo work has been done. This is a similar situation in which there's not very many devices out there, so as soon as we've got some to test on, we will be bringing that out. And so that's cool. That's 8 platforms. The goal of PhoneGap, or one of the early goals we used to talk about, was that we wanted to, we created this project so that the project would cease to exist. And it's sort of a Zen Vancouver stoner idea, and it doesn't make any sense at all. But the idea is that we're providing an implementation or a reference implementation that the browsers should adopt themselves. And it's working, and these device APIs are coming out now into the browsers. But there's new problems, or there's new gaps that we need to fill. And we're starting to look at what these might be. And if you use your imagination, you can imagine there's things like ebook readers. There's dashboards in cars. These screens are getting really cheap, and they're being embedded everywhere. And so PhoneGap is a bit of an unfortunate name because now we're looking at devices, and we don't know what those devices are going to be, but it's going to be really fucking cool, especially for web developers. I really only added this slide because I wanted to change that to either math or Malta. But I didn't get around to it, and so there's no real reason for this slide other than the fact that it's kind of cool. I'm going to talk about our API support next, and the way PhoneGap works is that we instantiate a web browser, and almost every mobile device right now is rocking a WebKit browser. So that means that we get to get all the goodness of HTML5 that gets bundled in with WebKit, things like SQLite, CSS3, Canvas, web workers eventually, sockets eventually. So that's cool. And then we further augment with all these PhoneGap APIs. And that's really cool because there's a lot of power here. I'm going to walk you guys through a few of the more powerful APIs that we have given access to. But I mean, if you look at this stuff, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do. Not the least of which is getting into things like accessing contacts and geolocation natively on the device. Things like magnometer means compass. People ask us that all the time. I don't know why they call it that. Sounds cool. So I mentioned the Device API Working Group earlier. If you go check out their site, you can see all the APIs that we're tracking. The Device API Working Group, I believe, was founded in August of 2009. PhoneGap itself was created in 2008. So it's good that we have a spec that we can track towards, but it's constantly moving and changing. And so this is a bit of a challenge for our project. But if you're at all interested in looking at where the direction of the internet is, this is the place to go look. Everybody's talking about what HTML5 is going to do, which is sort of retarded because it's mostly already here. It's not about what it's going to do, it's what we have to do with it. And what's coming next are going to be device APIs. So it's like HTML6. Yeah, so crucial concepts. It's a completely different world when you start writing for a device that has really bad connectivity. We've been spoiled by desktop browsers, and so we don't always necessarily know the context of which we're running or the speed and availability of the device that we have. So first thing that we have to check almost all the time is what platform am I running on? It would be nice to use feature detection, but this isn't always reliable when you're dealing with the same browser on every platform. So device.platform will return something like Android, if you're on an Android phone. Device ready is the most useful event. It gets fired after your DOM is loaded and you have access to all your device sensors. And so this is the sort of baseline implementation of a PhoneGap app is going to use these two events, or these two things. The next big thing is whether or not a network is reachable. It's a little bit unfortunate because this spec has changed, but we're going to keep backwards compatibility for it. Essentially, network reachable, you pass it a callback on success, and that will return a status. That status will tell you if you're online, if you're on Edge, Wi-Fi, or 3G. Super useful for when you're writing your applications. Right, so this is sort of an embarrassing thing. Console.log is pretty ubiquitous, and it's absolutely everywhere, except we cannot change it on the iPhone. And so on the iPhone, it's debug.log. Yeah, it's a real pain in the ass, but that's how it goes. And it's crucial. So testing. Testing's a tricky one because you're going to have to do it, and unfortunately, you're going to have to do it on a device, which means if you're going cross-platform, you're going to have all those devices. When you install these various emulators, you'll find that they don't really actually emulate anything, and it's hard to test things like an accelerometer when it's just on your screen. And so you have to have the devices. We have had other tools where we've found some levels of success, and one of those is QUnit. It's a fantastic testing library. jQuery uses it, and it happens to actually run on BlackBerries. So we use that. Not telling you that you have to use that, but if you're going to start writing mobile web app code, it's almost necessary. Right. So debugging support is something that people always ask us about. And they're like, do you guys have a debugger for PhoneGap? And the quick answer is yes. It's called Web Inspector. Most of your development can be done right in a browser. And so if you pop open Web Inspector, there you go. You've got a debugger right there. If you need to take it another level, though, and start debugging on actual hardware or native specific features, your best bet is to actually load up in whatever IDE that platform supports. In Windows land, that would mean Visual Studio. In Java land, that means a version of Eclipse. And they have full-on debuggers, so there is debugging support for PhoneGap. Privacy and security is another huge question people bring up all the time, and they ask us, what's security like in PhoneGap? And a quick answer for that one is it's the web, so there is none. And not even a laugh, come on, man. So when we're doing web development, we're in an inherently insecure environment. You have to assume that your inputs are going to be harmful, that you're going to have to go through proxies. You don't want to leave keys on your device. And so really that's it. There is no security. Right, so PhoneGap was originally written at Nitobi and worked on primarily by Nitobi employees, but that story's changed a lot in the last year. And now IBM is contributing more code to PhoneGap than we are, which is frightening and amazing at the same time. These guys are kicking serious ass, and we're seeing a ton of improvements, especially on Android and BlackBerry recently. Symbian's kicked in, Microsoft has been helping us. RIM recently launched their widget SDK, which is based on the W3C widget spec, and they've got a WebKit running on there, and they're totally on board for helping us build web apps natively. Palm, of course, is amazing, and Sony Ericsson. And so, yeah, there's some pretty heavy hitters getting involved. It's awesome. Also, Couch is now on mobile, which is super interesting. Yawn. Check it out. He's like down there and he's helping Ryu against the evil Ryu fire guys. I had a lot of fun with that slide. So CouchDB runs on Android right now. Apparently, it's being built also for iPhone. And I can't really tell you what this means because I'm not sure myself, but I know that it's cool because persistence is a tough problem, and synchronization is an even tougher problem, and Couch solves those really well. So having a little Couch running on your phone means that you also have a little mini web server running on your phone, which means that you could view PhoneGap as a tiny window to your Couch. And we've done a little bit of experimentation with this, which means you could update your app, say, in the cloud, and then that replicates down to your phone. Super powerful concept. And so this is going to be something to watch. It's early, but it's fascinating. Also, if you're looking for a really ghetto alternative to Couch, I wrote a library called Lawn Chair, which is pretty funny. Yeah, Google that. So we wouldn't be good citizens of the open source community if we didn't talk about where we fail, because we need your help to not fail anymore. And there's stuff to be worked on. There's lots of problems. And so what kind of problems do we have? I love how Ryu turns out to be this white guy with awesome hair. So device resolutions and pixel densities is kind of a huge problem. We're seeing this massive fragmentation and people are getting worried, and what about standardization? You may as well give up on that dream. There's not going to be any. There's going to be all kinds of weird shaped devices, and we should really be viewing this as an awesome opportunity to innovate on what UIs are. We're taking pretty tiny baby steps right now into the tablet space and into even the phone space, and we don't really know what we're doing. So far it looks like lists and buttons. I'm fairly certain that actually won't be the case in a few years. You see UIs like Flipboard, and there's some really expressive, interesting stuff going on. And all these different screen dimensions are an opportunity for new micro libraries that will target these different types of situations specifically. And so device resolutions and pixel densities is a huge pain in the ass. DOM inconsistencies is another big pain in the ass. We've got all these various WebKits, and PPK likes to say that there's no WebKit on mobile. And he's kind of right, in a way, but really, all these WebKits are pretty similar, and there is only small differences between them. But there's a lot of heavyweight people out there that are tackling this problem. The Sencha guys have their library. jQuery Mobile has a bunch of PNGs, which may turn into a library. Yahoo's working on it, Dojo's working on it, the Yuzibu guys are working on it with Embed.js. Thomas Fuchs just released Zepto.js. We wrote a ghetto library called Woo! Yeah, I like Zepto, it's cool. It's like even smaller than XUI, which is the library we wrote to solve the problem. What one? Vapor.js? Are you joking? Okay. You're not joking. It's an unfortunate name for a software library. Vapor.js. Is it that small? 0 bytes, yeah. Man, it's fast. It already loaded. Sweet. Okay, and so our final biggest problem is that we're dealing with a moving spec. And actually, that's not our final problem. We have another one. I'll get into that one soon. So we've got a moving spec, and basically we're breaking backwards compatibility right now, but we're going to stop doing that very soon. The Device API Working Group is starting to ratify on a few of the core APIs, and so very soon we're going to be able to say, okay, line in the sand, this is what PhoneGap looks like. And the final toughest problem, which I saved the best for last, is getting started. Getting started in mobile is really tough because unfortunately, while our promise is that you can do web development, at the end of the day, you're still going to have to install these native SDKs. In some cases, it's not that bad. You know, the iPhone SDK, it only takes like 3 or 4 hours to download, but once you got it, it's sweet. And all you got to do is double click something and it's there. The case of Android, it only takes a few minutes to download and it only takes 3 or 4 hours to update. So, I mean, whatever. And like one's on Java and one's Objective-C, and it's a little bit hairy because you got to learn a new IDE. But we're looking to solve that one too. And so there's 2 projects that are brand new that Naitobi's just pushing out at this very moment. One of them is build.phonegap.com, and I'm going to give you a demo of it in a second. But it's a hosted build solution that encapsulates all of PhoneGap's work onto the server side. You push up a index HTML or a zip file, or you give us a Git repo, we'll turn it into a native app for every platform and send it back down to you. Sweet, right? The second project is, so Naitobi came out to Europe a week early, and we decided that we would, really lock down and focus and get some work done. But we stayed in Amsterdam, so none of that got done. But we did ship some of it, and if you have an Android device, if you do a search for PhoneGap dev browser, there's an app out there, and it's PhoneGap. The first 2 links in it are for our documentation. The second one is to run our test suite. The third one is to add an arbitrary bookmark to anywhere on the internet, and you could load that within PhoneGap. And so it allows you to start playing with PhoneGap right now without having to install anything but this app, which is pretty cool. So, how am I doing for time? 5 minutes? Sweet. Okay, so, 8, 7, 6. So this is build.phonegap.com, which you can only... No, that's not it. I'll show it to you guys here. And so our working name for it is the OK API, or Okapi, which is this bizarre creature. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it's pretty cool. But that's just like a working name. This is going to be the whole user interface for creating apps. Eventually, we want full Git push-pull support, and I kind of put that in, but it kind of broke 10 minutes before my presentation, so I'm not going to demonstrate that. This is slow because it's running on a MacBook Air with like 10 mobile SDKs on it, so I'm just going to hop to this one to show you what a final build will look like. It's really bare bones. The idea is that this will be more of an API and less of a web app. we're hoping that developers will use this to build their own tooling on top of it. And that's it. Thanks a lot, everybody. Are there any questions? Or do we not do that at JSConf? Yeah. What's our experiences with app stores? Yeah. So it takes about 10 minutes to publish to the Android marketplace. With iPhone, a week tops. Apple's actually gotten pretty quick. How long does it take for BlackBerry? A week or so. Takes twice as long to develop for BlackBerry, but.
About the guidelines and UI.
Yeah, the guidelines are fucking crazy, dude. I mean, I don't know, like, it's nuts. Build a web app if you think it's retarded. That's what we would do, right? If you need to access the core native device features, then you're going to have to play by their rules, which means anything arbitrarily that they decide. Android's marketplace isn't like that. Any other questions? Nothing? Oh, yeah, you're back? Okay.
Well, the Windows 7 support, do you know anything about it? Because you said you mainly based on WebKit, right?
No. Windows 7 is based on IE6. Yeah, just when you thought we were done with that one. It's still alive. Although PPK was saying that Microsoft is promising that IE9 is going to ship on Windows Phone 7. My belief is that if that doesn't come with a date, that could be, 10 decades into the future. So who knows?
But you have one, you said that you have PhoneGap running, that someone has ported it, right?
Yes, yeah, it's running the simulator. How did they do it? They instantiate IE6, Chromeless, and then they bind, actually Phil can speak to that. Guy, just look for the guy with the epic hair. He can show you. I don't have it running. All right, thanks a lot, everybody.